All right, the movement of matter. This should look familiar. By the end of this video, hopefully you'll be able to describe how the water cycle, carbon cycle, nitrogen cycle, phosphorus cycle work within ecosystems. And we're going to add to that, be able to discuss the movement of calcium, magnesium, potassium, and sulfur within living matter and within ecosystems. Because the within biological ecosystems involves cycles of biological, geological, and chemical processes. These cycles are collectively known as biogeochemical cycles. Anytime we add water to the movement of a cycle, it's referred to the hydraulic cycle. The hydraulic cycle is a big system. Essentially, heat from the sun causes water to evaporate from oceans, lakes, soils. Solar energy also provides energy for photosynthesis, during which plants release water from their leaves into the atmosphere. This process is known as transpiration. The water vapor that enters the atmosphere eventually cools and forms clouds and produce precipitation in the form of, rain, snow, sleet, hail. Some precipitation falls back into the ocean and some of it falls on land. When water falls, it can basically take three different routes. It can return to the atmosphere in evaporation. It can enter the soil system and be taken up by plant roots. Or it can find some sort of combined way. We actually call that combined method evapotranspiration. It's just a term that's often used by scientists to basically measure water moving through an ecosystem. If water doesn't follow that path, it can hit the soil and basically percolate through the ground into what we call groundwater, or an an underland aquifer. And eventually the water will move as runoff, and runoff will be across the entire surface of the land. Runoff, streams, rivers, and eventually at some point it will reach the ocean or some ultimate pool of water. Because Earth is a closed system with the respect to matter, water never leaves it. Nevertheless, human activities can cycle in a number of ways. For example, we can harvest trees that can reduce evapotranspiration, and that is also by reducing the plant, biomass. We can moderate a steep slope, making it more level, increasing runoff. We can increase solid surface area like building a road or rooftops, which basically increase evaporation by increasing the amount of runoff. Humans alter the hydraulic cycle in more ways than even just that. We divert water from one place to another, use some of it for drinking, and then some of it for irrigating crops, growing crops that feed our food. Carbon is the most important element in the living organism world. I mean, it makes up about 20% of all of our total body mass and body weight. It's the basis for long chains of organic molecules. It forms cell membranes and cell walls. Out of backbones of proteins. We use it to store energy. Pretty much, other than water, there are a few molecules in our not contain carbon. So understanding the carbon cycle and how it moves around our biosphere is definitely important. The carbon cycle is a 7-process system that is driven by photosynthesis, respiration, exchange of some sorts, sedimentation, part of a burial, extraction, and then eventually a combustion. These processes can be categorized as either like a fast or a slow part of this process. For example, the accumulation of fossil fuels underground is a very, very slow process, where the combustion of fossil fuels is a very fast process. When producers photosynthesize, whether it's on land or it's in water, they take up carbon dioxide and incorporate that carbon into their tissues. Some of that carbon is carbon dioxide when the organisms respire. Much of it, or whatever's left after life, is also returned to the environment after the organism dies. When the organism dies, carbon that was part of its living system pools and becomes part of its dead biomass. Decomposers break down all of that material, which eventually returns CO2 or air via respiration, and the cycle continues. In sedimentation, you can see in the figure here that the amount of carbon released from the ocean into the atmosphere roughly equals the amount of atmospheric carbon dioxide that diffuses into ocean water. Some of the carbon dioxide dissolved in the ocean enters the food web via photosynthesis, and its number one contributor is algae. Another portion of that carbon dioxide dissolved into the ocean combines with calcium, forms ions, and in the water will eventually form calcium carbonate. The extraction and combustion of carbon is in the middle of the figure there. The fuels by humans in relatively recent time began when humans starting to rely on things like coal, oil, natural gas for energy sources. By itself doesn't really alter the carbon cycle. It's the combustion that causes a problem. Combustion of these fossil fuels by humans and the natural combustion of carbon by fires, wildfires, volcanoes, essentially all do the same thing. They release carbon dioxide into the soil as ash and into the atmosphere as carbon dioxide gas. As you see, combustion, respiration, and decomposition, they operate in very similar ways. All three processes can cause organic molecules to be broken down, produce water, and also energy. The difference is that respiration and decomposition are a biotic process, whereas combustion is a biotic process. The carbon cycle moves between the air and the land. Involved in it is photosynthesis and respiration. It involves many other processes such as what we call exchange, sedimentation, the involvement of a burial with fossil fuels. We extract those fossil fuels and a process of combustion. Before the Industrial Revolution, the atmospheric concentration of carbon dioxide was very little. So until recently, carbon entering pool areas, it was balanced. And it's no longer balanced as since the Industrial Revolution. Human activities have had major influences on the carbon cycle. The best known and most significant human alteration of the carbon cycle is obviously the combustion of fossil fuels. Tree harvesting is another human activity that's affected the carbon cycle. See, trees store a large amount of carbon in their wood, in their cellulose, both above and below ground. So the destruction of the forest by cutting it or burning it releases an enormous amount of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And unless enough new trees are planted to recapture that carbon, then the balance of carbon dioxide gas is upset, even with harvesting trees.